The return of Donald Trump to the White House and the meeting the other day of Trump and Vance and Zelensky, the meeting with Keir Starmer, has all, it may have all been a bit too much for the SNP's Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn, who I have a lot of admiration for. At the heart of the issue is Trump's increasingly combative stance towards Ukraine and his public dressing down of President Zelensky in the televised Oval Office clash. And while Starmer was trying to navigate the delicate path of diplomacy, Flynn and his nationalist colleagues have taken a far more confrontational approach, demanding that the UK rescind its invitation for a state visit, much of which might well take place in Scotland. Stephen Flynn didn't mince his words, condemning Trump's treatment of Zelensky as bullying and grotesque. Flynn, who has one of the reasons I admire Flynn is that he has the capacity to be able to speak without notes and in full, magnificent sentences. And Flynn accused Starmer of being on his knees before the American president and urged him to revoke the offer of a state visit. The SNP's Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Stephen Gethins, joined the chorus, arguing that Trump's actions proved Europe could no longer depend on the United States for security and must take greater responsibility for its own defence. And First Minister John Swinney went further, declaring that a Trump visit would undermine the future of Western democracy unless Trump offered his unequivocal backing for Ukraine. I think it's not up to Zelensky to be apologising to Trump. I think it's Trump who should have been apologising to Zelensky for calling him a dictator, and now should be apologising to Zelensky for provoking a riot situation in the Oval Office. Zelensky has nothing to apologise for. And the SNP's long-standing opposition to nuclear weapons, coupled with Trump's unpredictability, adds another layer to the position. Swinney reiterated his party's demand to scrap the UK's nuclear deterrent at a time when NATO's cohesion is being tested. His argument the UK's military priorities should focus on conventional defence rather than on the renewal of Trident, particularly given the global uncertainty exacerbated by Trump's foreign policy whims. Starmer, by contrast, remains absolutely resolute, focused on the broader goal, maintaining the UK's diplomatic credibility. And in an interview this morning with Laura Kuenssberg, he dismissed Flynn's rhetoric as unhelpful grandstanding, insisting that his priority is building bridges and ensuring a lasting peace in Europe. He might consider building a bridge between Scotland and Northern Ireland. He accused his nationalist critics of prioritising Twitter outrage over pragmatic diplomacy. And for Starmer, engaging with Trump is not an endorsement of his policies, but a necessity dictated by realpolitik. The UK must work with the United States, regardless of who occupies the White House, to ensure continued support for Ukraine and wider European security. But I suspect Trump is secretly rather pleased with Stephen Flynn's effort. I certainly am. Starmer cannot possibly speak out against Trump, but Flynn can. Starmer is constrained by diplomacy and by his position. Flynn is not. Alienating Trump, Starmer might reason, risks driving him further into isolationist territory, which would have dire consequences for Ukraine and NATO's unity. So if Starmer were to alienate Trump, that would be a major diplomatic disaster. Flynn, not so much. And Flynn can at least articulate things rather well. I must say, I rather enjoy poking fun at Trump and Vance. I find Vance's position rather sad, because Vance is an intelligent boy and he's coming across as a complete twit. I'm not even sure I've got the vowel right there. But he's a... when you move into top politics, you are obliged to follow a script. And whoever has written the script for Vance has not really done a terribly good job. Similarly for Trump, but Trump probably can't get much beyond the script. Vance has a brain. as does Starmer, of course, and Starmer is acutely aware that the UK has no veto power over the US foreign policy, and Trump's belligerence towards Zelensky, his demand for greater Ukrainian gratitude, his refusal to commit to long-term US aid all illustrate his current approach, his transactional approach to diplomacy. But for Starmer, reacting with public condemnation, let alone withdrawing an invitation for a state visit, risks closing channels of communication at a crucial moment. Trump's remarks about Zelensky being disrespectful and his assertion that Ukraine must not rely on American involvement for leverage in negotiations have sent shockwaves through European capitals. And while Trump presents his position as a push for peace, many see it as a green light for Putin. His reluctance to unequivocally support Ukraine fuels fears that Washington may step back from its commitments, leaving European allies to fill the vacuum. Flynn and the SNP argue that the UK must take a firmer stance, however, showing Trump that his treatment of Ukraine will not be tolerated. Their position reflects a broader European anxiety about Trump's foreign policy unpredictability, and Swinny's argument that a state visit should be conditional on Trump's reaffirming his commitment to Ukraine reflects an attempt to use Britain's diplomatic leverage as a means of pressure. Starmer, however, is playing a longer game, and his sanctions on Russia, targeting its shadow oil fleet and military supply chains, signal a continued hardline stance against Putin. Yet he also sees the necessity of keeping Trump engaged in diplomatic discussions rather than allowing him to dictate the narrative unchallenged. His approach, resisting knee-jerk reactions and working within the constraints of international diplomacy, seeks to maintain Britain's role as a bridge between Europe and Washington. Starmer is constrained. That doesn't mean that Flynn has to be. It doesn't mean that people like me have to be. But Starmer has a different job, as does the King. The question then is one of strategy. Should Britain join the SNP in rebuking Trump and risk pushing him further into isolationism? Absolutely not. Or should it, as Starmer insists, engage with him pragmatically to prevent a breakdown in Western unity? Absolutely. Flynn's approach is one of moral clarity, and long may that last. He argues that the UK must not dignify Trump's behaviour with a state visit. Starmer's, by contrast, is a bet on political pragmatism, prioritising influence over indignation, and his critics accuse him of appeasement. But he would argue that diplomacy often requires swallowing bitter pills for the sake of achieving broader security objectives. Both sides claim to stand for Western diplomacy, but their methods differ. The SNP wants to draw a firm line. Starmer wants to hold a steady course. Stephen Flynn has an opportunity, I think, when Trump finally comes on his state visit and addresses the gathered houses of the gathered House of Commons and House of Lords. That is it, the House of Parliament. The two chambers, anyway, and Stephen Flynn presumably can stand up and harangue President Trump and see how Trump likes to be told that he's a dictator, to see how Trump likes to be told that he's not grateful, and to see whether Trump reacts with gratitude and with finesse when he's a guest of the British Parliament. Let's see how that goes. Stephen Flynn has every opportunity to do something dramatic, and he can only do that when Trump is actually on our soil. The outcome of this debate and the outcome of Flynn's actions will shape the UK's role in global diplomacy for years to come, but it requires Starmer's steady hand on the tiller in the first instance, I think. And then it's up to Stephen Flynn. Let's see what he does.